Now, my next guest speaker is Mr. Abhishek Agarwal. He is the Senior Vice President, Global Delivery, the Judge Group, and he's going to talk on the role of CSR globally. Since we are doing India International CSR Summit 2020, he is going to speak on CSR globally. And Mr. Abhishek Agarwal is the Senior Vice President, Global Delivery, the Judge Group, is a dynamic leader with more than 20 years of extensive cross-functional experience with some of the most trusted global brands such as the Judge Group, L&T Infotech, Capgemini, Invent, Birlasoft, and Genpact. Abhishek is the SVP Global Delivery for the Judge Group and is responsible for the launch and oversight of Judge India, a key component of Judge's global delivery strategy. He is an MBA from ENPC Paris, France, and a Bachelor of Engineering from Marathwada University, India. And during the past 20 years in the corporate world, he made splendid effort building delivery centers across America, Europe, India, and APAC. With his exceptional leadership and managerial skills in global delivery, strategic IT, outsourcing, talent acquisition, recruitment sourcing, MIS analytics, and staffing, business analysis, and operations, Abhishek contributed massively to the growth and success of both organizations and people. Besides leading the Judge Group's global delivery mission in India, Abhishek is also an active member of various professional organizations in the US. He is a well known speaker at various industry forums for global recruitment, talent acquisition, operations, and workforce planning. He is a proven leader with a track record of success in setting up global delivery strategies and international offices. Welcome, Mr. Abhishek, into this third day of the session.
Thank you, Mr. Sandeep. I appreciate the long introduction. I'll try to keep my speech. I would rather say brief in terms of what I'm going to present. So thanks once again, and thanks for all the esteemed panelists who basically talked about the different aspects of CSR. We all heard about different projects, different areas that various companies are moving into in terms of embracing a responsibility towards CSR. I would slightly drift in terms of my thought process as to how CSR actually got into the picture, and then where India stands, and then I'll take it to the technology side of the version and how it's making an impactful I would say presence from the technical aspect. So while CSR as a term first gained popularity in the second half of the 20th century, for us in India, actually it was something we had in our daily lives from the time immemorial, either through the act of daily charity and philanthropy. If you all remember, we were doing it, for the past, and I would say the time immemorial days, keeping something for the poor or giving something, to someone who was actually in the need. That was happening, right? I would say from the ages in India, but somewhat we lost in between. And this term got coined by Europe, during the mid 1950s or 1940s, wherein the CSR actually, became the term in Europe, and got led by various organizations over there. There were several activities around the green consciousness, green movement, which actually secured major gains and signified as well that the firms in the continent were more amenable towards the CSR. So while Europe actually led it, during, let's say, 78 years back, it was US actually which caught it up because the government really forced it and recognized the need for the businesses to be held accountable for this sort of an activity. This has led actually to the mainstreaming of the idea of CSR in the West. I'm talking about Europe and US to an extent where it has become an important part of the business imperative to taking care of the workforce towards the CSR and the goals to be achieved, looked upon by various people for CSR activities. While West did all this, in terms of, I would say, initiating this particular project, initiative, policy around CSRs, It was India actually, the first country in the world, and even Anita, the Tanya talked about it, in the last session, that wherein the India got this imposed as basically a statutory obligation for the corporations meeting certain criteria. Yesterday also I heard couple of panelists, they talked about 2% of the profit needs to go for the companies which are more than $70 million in revenues. So India actually put this in place, and this provision makes India the only country in the world that makes both the spending and reporting, of CSR obligations mandatory. So otherwise, even here in US, Europe, anywhere across the world, you would not find that sort of the reporting mechanism where the government has actually propelled to come up and show that what's happening on the projects that you are working on, and that needs to be like highly transparent. So far, it's startling that we have around like $10.1 billion of money which has gone into almost like 100,000, like 1 lakh CSR projects. This data was till around like December 2019. So this data alone stands as an evidence that how significant CSR has become, in the 21st century, and India definitely taking the lead out of the entire ecosystem. On Just to add on that, even in the World Economic Forum in Davos in January this year itself, before COVID, various business leaders around the world, they started basically increasingly embracing a new form of capitalism, which is more like moving from one focus primarily on the shareholder value to the one focus on serving the broader world. Generally, we are calling this as the fourth industrial revolution, the 4.0 that we are talking about. So, this definitely is going to rewrite the role of the business in the society. Their adoption of different, I would say, parameters around CSR, and basically the purpose around it. Now, the question arises that what is the responsibility of international businesses when it comes to CSR? If if you look at certain facts and certain data, most businesses are right now striving to find a balance between the purpose and the profit. So a lot of companies are making, while they're making some good profits, the purpose is missing. They're not able to align, or they're not able to have a good alignment between the purpose and the profit. There was a survey wherein more than 50% of the executives of different international and global multinationals, they said that increasing their company's positive impact on society was among their top 5 desired outcomes of the outcomes, for the industry 4.0, that basically, the industrial revolution 4.0. And if we compare, it was only like 35% 2 years back, when we spoke to different CXOs and different C-level people, which actually has gone up to 50%. So I think that's where the responsibility is basically moving. It's transgressing in the direction wherein CSR is actually become more of the fulcrum, policy making in the entire profit-driven and purpose-driven companies. I also heard about, different challenges which Mrs. Anjali Makhija, actually, she was speaking about yesterday, that there are a lot of challenges about the impact, transparency, and the community alignment for these projects, So I would say technology is the answer. So technology, while a lot of, again, speakers talked about the adoption of technology, I would say technology adoption would be primarily into the two areas. One would be the preventive use of the technology, wherein we are using, let's say, IoT, artificial intelligence, blockchain, all these different technologies, for the prevention of, let's say, the various disasters, to help them, to help different companies for the climate controls, the better climate management, be it on the agriculture side. So it's more on the preventive side of the technology, wherein these technologies can be utilized and can really help big time, multiple, companies, be it on the energy sector, be it on, the agro sector, to help community on the whole, and eventually helping the earth for for saving us, saving people from certain disasters, for managing the climate well. The other part would be more on, I would say, the adoption of technology more from reporting and analytics perspective, and I think that's where the adoption of certain technological platforms would come into the picture. uh, so there are, like, multiple platforms, like, I don't know if you guys would have heard about them or not, like Pure Platform, Swift CSR. I mean, these are the different tools wherein that can be used uh, across various industries to connect enterprises with NGOs and social service platforms. There are several online CSR solutions, including social marketplaces, which aim to provide streamlined and transparent processes to fill the gap between the NGOs and their causes, their donors, volunteers, and the corporates who want to get involved with them. Essentially, these platforms, they serve as the fundamental thread facilitating the exchange between every stakeholder of the sector. So, and they also enable all parties to work together and monitor activities remotely. So, I mean, the answer is there. What I'm trying to say here is that while there are certain challenges, but if we really adopt the technology well, more, I would say, on the reporting and the analytics side, the stakeholder management side, the challenges which different panelists that talked about the transparency, the impact, the community alignment, the stakeholder alignment, all those can be served well and can be looked upon well. So I mean, various, again, speakers talked about multiple projects, multiple areas, but again, from, I mean, taking a different leaf out of the entire context, I would like to talk upon certain facts, and these facts are basically, they are oriented or categorized around five major themes. We talked about the purpose. A lot of people talked about the employee engagement. Some spoke about the disaster response. Then customers, and basically even employee volunteering. Mr. Brajesh Gupta, he talked about that it should not become a volunteer tourism, and that's the perfect way to talk about. I mean, people, a lot of people, they say that they want to volunteer but not for the tourism purpose. So out of these five key themes, I mean, I'll present some facts, I mean, which are definitely startling and even an eye opener, for certain companies who are trying to embrace CSR at a global or at a regional level, or basically who look forward, for CSR as a fulcrum of their, policy making. So for the purpose, talking about the purpose, um, fact number one, I mean, it states that the companies with a clear, defined sense of purpose are 50% more likely to successfully expand into the new market. Um, Fact number two is 50% of the millennials, would rather take a pay cut to find a work that matches their values. So let's say if we have a defined purpose, and I spoke about that, during the earlier part of this discussion, the a lot of companies are struggling, between while they're making profit, but what's the purpose and how do they connect both the piece together, purpose and profit. This fact really helps us, to understand better how the purpose can be defined vis-a-vis, the CSR, projects implementation in certain organizations. It also talks about, there's the other fact as well, which basically sheds light on the loyalty and retention, as more than half of the millennial employees would defend a purpose-driven company if people spoke badly about it. So, I mean, these are some facts about the purpose. Now about the employee engagement, uh, fact number one would be it shares a wholesome insight, as employees who have a chance to donate or participate in charities through their work are happier than those who do not. I mean, in US, there was the other survey which was done. Uh, the US employees who fall into the not engaged and actively disengaged categories cost their companies $500 billion, in the lost productivity. And that's like an annual figure. It's as good as, the economy or the GDP of certain countries. $500 billion is just lost, because the employees, they actually fall into the not engaged category. The third fact about the employee engagement would be that it establishes that 50% of the employees believe that their employers should not or should connect with them with opportunities for charitable engagement. So I think Tanya was talking about that employee engagement, why we should, engross or bring in more people to do this CSR activity. I mean, the fact is that 50% of the employees believe that their employees should connect with them. So basically, at times, companies may not go to the employees, but employees are willing to be, driven into these sort of engagements. For disaster response, we all speak about climate change. We all speak about earthquakes, as to what CSR can contribute. But the reality is that the disaster relief accounted for just 3% of the overall corporate giving in 2018, with the vast majority of the gifts directed to the immediate disaster relief as opposed to the risk reduction. So, a lot of money is going into the immediate, I would say, immediate relief for the disaster that happens, but the prevention of the disaster, the funding over there is not going through. And that is actually, again, an area wherein the companies can look for, doing some different sort of CSR activities or the projects associated on the disaster side, of the management. On a global scale, disaster response receives more than 5 times the amount of, the risk reduction. So we can reduce the risk. As I said, the disaster relief, the funding is really high from the CSR perspective, but it happens only when the disaster happens. What we can do, we can make more profit. We can basically do the preventive action, in this category, and the CSR can also be done pretty well. And on the customer side now, statistics, they show that 71% of the millennials hope that companies will take the lead on the social issues that they find important. So, and this is more from the customer's aspect, again, some panelists talked about the customer engagement as well, how customers, perceive the CSR for their suppliers and the partners they are associated with. So 40% of the customers seek purposeful brands and trust them to act in the best interest of the society. Moreover, more companies than ever before are linking their brand with a social impact initiative, partially in response to COVID-19 and the consumer pressures to play an integral role in the recovery. So I think, again, this is again an area wherein CSR can actually be brought into, at a very root level, at a basic, I would say, grassroots level. And last but not the least, about the employee volunteering, it fact number one, again, it says that the employees who are engaged and have high well-being are 90% more likely to volunteer their time. At the same time, the other fact talks about and shows that 83% of the executives believe that skill-based volunteerism could help employees satisfy their desire for purpose and hone their teamwork and leadership abilities. So again, here the idea is, and again, it's a very different perspective which I try to brought in, from the CSR aspect, that what are the different areas, we talked about the key themes. A lot of us, talked about the purpose, the disaster management, the technology, employee volunteering, employee engagement, customer engagement. But where we are and what is the scope that CSR, as an activity, as a responsibility has for different, again, stakeholders, be it the client, be it an employee, be it a volunteer, or be it a customer, or be it a person, on the ground, wherein this can become the part of, or I would say the fulcrum of the entire policy making in the companies. So with that note, I would like to end my session and would like to thank everyone, the listeners, the panelists, and the host, for providing me this opportunity. Thank you, Sandeep.